I'm sorry. Yeah. Somebody. Time is 6:30. Good evening, everybody. And for the Scrutiny Committee this evening, I'll quickly run through the housekeeping. We're in the committee suite. There are no visiting speakers at all, and I take it that all staff and councillors are aware of the fire evacuation procedures. Right. The apologies for absence and substitutions. I have two substitutions this evening, and that's Councillor Bowes replaced by Councillor Johnson, and Councillor Bean replaced by Councillor Isett. Absences, Councillor Tony Jones has yet to appear, so unless he turns up, he'll be logged as absent for the meeting. Are there any declarations of interest items on the agenda tonight? None are being declared. Thank you. There are no urgent matters. And now we address the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of September. Are there any comments as to the accuracy of those minutes? Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. There was a reference to the transport talks giving us a breakdown on 4 subjects, and then there were only 3 summaries after that. I couldn't quite recall what was correct. So it's minute 13/23. Short briefings on 4 separate subjects, and then we've got 3 subjects beneath. So I didn't know if that was supposed to just to...
Could I ask Democratic Services to comment on that one? Right. Democratic Services will examine that and correct it if necessary. But the minutes I have in front of me, I will sign them and a correction will be issued if required. Thank you for the observation. Move on to the substantive of the evening is the draft proposals for the 24-25 budget and revised medium-term financial strategy 24-25 to 27-28. And this paper is produced by the portfolio holder, Councillor Gavin James, and and the lead officer is Sue Curtin, who's also present. So I invite Councillor Gavin James to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. For those of you who've been around for a number of years, you'll know this is how the budgeting process works, that it starts its journey. We do some work, and come November, it goes out to public consultation, and part of that consultation exercise is it also comes to scrutiny for councillors to also contribute to the draft budget proposals. The responses by the public and councillors are considered, and then the final budget will reappear in February at full council in the normal way. So this is an opportunity to pass any comments, any additions or subtractions you'd like to see in those budget proposals. But there's lots of opportunity to do it. But obviously, the sooner you give me the opportunity to look into your changes you'd like to make, then the sooner we can start working out how they can be funded to make sure we have a balanced budget come February. For those of you newer to the process, this is all about the revenue budget. The shiny stuff, the capital budget, that takes a slightly different journey. It does come to full council in February, but it goes in a different route to get there. So this is just the revenue items, arguably perhaps the boring budget, because it's the day-to-day stuff that we have to do. Now, again, for like a working class Rory Stewart doing his explainers, but essentially when Councillor Isaac set his budget last year, he also had a medium-term financial strategy, and that's the basis on which we build our budget. So this document looks at all the changes that have happened, either through cabinet decisions or circumstances where we've adjusted what was the projection of what was going to happen this year. The biggest adjustment is probably the £2 million adjustment that is for things that just simply cost more. It was, let's say, these MTFS, it's a 4-year projection. The accuracy of those projections is quite good for the following year, but it's quite difficult the further out you get. And particularly in a climate like the current one where inflation has changed dramatically after many years of being very stable, it sort of means there's greater cost. So the biggest adjustment to the budget is the £2 million extra cost we're absorbing purely because of inflation. And whilst inflation is now coming down, which is great to see, obviously inflation is not prices going down, it's just the rate of increase slowing down, which means we've still got to absorb the extra costs that have come through those years of higher inflation. There is also within the budget, obviously, the Cabinet's proposals, the shift in direction, if you like, those areas where we've decided to put a little bit more money to try and improve services where we felt they were priorities. Within the document, the key one you'll see is the street care and grounds maintenance. £750,000 a year being spent on increasing the size of those teams, the vehicles they use to make our streets cleaner and tidier, our hedges better kept, trimmed, bus cutting, etc., to make the borough a greater place to live in, to work in, to visit, to do business in. You'll also see a significant contribution to children's play areas within the budget, including the member staff to coordinate the maintenance programme. It's about £250,000 a year extra on children's play areas. We need to improve them, maintain them better. We think it's really important, particularly post-COVID, that children get out, get active, and we provide a safe environment for them to do that. There are some other issues in there around housing, accessing housing. There's some work that's really about the future in terms of working out how we can deliver more affordable housing, particularly social housing, and some work that we need to work much closer with housing associations to deliver that. But also some work about just navigating the current system. It's very difficult, everything's online, everything's on computers, and we think we need to be offering more support to our residents who are trying to access the affordable housing options that are open to them. So those are the big key items. A couple of things that were in the previous MTFS where we are making a slight tweak. One of them was the withdrawal of the council tax benefits. For those of you who remember, the government will pay council tax benefits of up to 80% of the council tax. The other 20% is left to the resident. Historically, this council's filled that void with discretionary payments, and we are going to maintain those payments. The original budget proposals were to see them lifted, so the poorest in the borough will not have to pay council tax. We're also freezing bulky waste charges. It's a very difficult charge to understand how it impacts on people differently. That someone who spends a lot of money buying a whole new sofa for £2,500 ends up paying a bit to get it picked up. Someone who's just bought a second-hand fridge for 20 quid is paying pretty much the same amount. So we want to go away and have a look at them. So they're frozen again for this year. I think something that Councillor Isa did last year as well was to freeze them. We're going to carry on with that freeze. The net result, obviously, increasing costs. We can't absorb them all. So within the budget, there's still the assumption that fees and charges will go up around 3%. Obviously, there are certain things that don't go up 3%. Car parking charges, we're not putting them up to £1.23 for an hour or whatever. They'll be going up at a sort of slightly different rates. But generally, the average is 3%. And also, council tax will go up by £5 a year, which is 10p a week for the average resident. Last year, obviously, council tax was frozen, which has put us in a tighter position this year, because if you freeze council tax, you can never get that money back. So the £250,000 that was missed out on last year, that will be there every year forever until the rules change on the rate of increase. So we are stuck with that. It's over the MTFS period, it's £1 million cost. Not saying it's the wrong thing to do last year, it was a decision made, but we can't unmake that decision. So that gives you an outline. I'm sure you've read the report. Happy to take any questions. Other than that, I'm going to listen to the debate and discussion to see if I can pick up any ideas on how we can improve it.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to bring members' attention to page 15 of the report, which is the recommendation that is given in this document to the Cabinet. And as referred to by the portfolio holder,
Page 12, you need to look.
excuse me?
If you look at page 12, it's got the role of the Scrutiny Committee in the process.
Yes, I appreciate that. But by your own words, if there's any tweaks that you want to recommend to Cabinet, there's set out on page 15. And if you want to have another reference, the summary and reasons for the recommendation, which is the recommendation, is on page 52. And that itemizes section 29 on that page. So it's a kind of relationship between the reasons and what is in the recommendations. I'll now open this to the committee to make comment on the report. And I'll just take you in order as people come up for comment. Councillor? Fenimore? Sorry?
I thought you knew me.
I was going to call you by your first name and I shouldn't.
Okay. Just for you, Councillor James, you've mentioned a great support for play areas that's going to increase. Unfortunately, the children's play area inspection costs, safety costs, have been passed to parish and town councils by the previous administration. Are these going to remain in place?
There's nothing in these proposals to change that, but it's something I can go away and look at.
Councillor Ganesh?
Thank you, Chair. Page 35, 14.6, Section 106, Green Space Officer, Extension 2627, which is great, but the tail end of that process, which is to maintain once it's adopted and make sure that we monitor what promised by the developer is carried out. We're struggling with that process at the moment. From a ward where we have a lot of new builds and recently adapted, or the developments going through the adoption process, I think we probably need a bit more intervention in there.
What's the question, Councillor Gazan?
Yeah, I just would like to make a note that we should have looked into a bit more and have some sort of provision in there to follow that process through.
That's been noted by the portfolio holder. Thank you. Councillor Basham.
Yeah, I'd second that, Councillor Ganesh. We have developments in our ward where adoption has been too slow.
As a comment, I can endorse that, and I think most ward councillors will do so. I remember when I first became a ward councillor, I discovered adoption in one part of my ward had taken 35 years. It was absolutely ridiculous. Councillor Isaac?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, portfolio holder, for the summary that you gave, which is very helpful. You are good enough in your introduction to acknowledge the sound financial inheritance bequeathed to you by many years of Conservative administration. As you say, I've been through this process of budget formulation over many years, I think we're here tonight at Scrutiny to understand your thinking in coming forward to these proposals, and to ask questions and make sure that what you're proposing to spend council and residents' money on is well spent and well directed, because ultimately we're accountable to the voters. And I suppose that it would be helpful to start with to understand a couple of things really, as a new administration, how it was that you decided to put forward certain priorities in these proposals that were different from what had gone before, and so that's my first question. So I'd like to just get under the skin of what it was that caused you to say, well, actually, this is where we need to be investing more money, and how you think you're going to get best value for that. And then secondly, when you were presented with the information by Sue Curtin and her team, what do you understand to be the risks that you need to navigate over this 4-year period of these proposals, so if you could address those 2 points, I think might be helpful in terms of how we look at this as a scrutiny committee.
Well, we arrived at the point of, obviously post-election, we'd all been on lots of doorsteps, so both the independent group, the Liberal Democrat group, but also speaking to the Labour group, and you'd have heard many of the same things on the same doorsteps. And that was used to shape what our priorities would be, and certainly the view that we weren't going to be a council that stops doing stuff. We were going to be a council that does stuff well, but obviously does stuff at best value. So from that, there was a list of things that we'd love to do that was drawn up. And then that list obviously goes through, as it would with any process, a bit like that Christmas gift list that your mum used to turn around and say, you can't have all of that. we went through that list and we picked out the bits that we felt, a combination of things. I mean, things like the better grounds maintenance, street care, they're very much now about things that will be an immediate impact and felt by residents. Some things, certainly looking at how we deliver more affordable housing, tackling climate change, stuff about solar panels on community centre roofs, those things they're there for the future. They're not something you can just do overnight. So there's a mixture of stuff that is building a stronger borough for the future as well as delivering a better borough now. And they had to come in at a price that we felt that we could reasonably absorb into the medium-term financial strategy now and have confidence that we'd be able to sustain that level of services, whilst never stopping that process that you have to do in any organisation is look at everything you do and ask yourself, could we do it better? Could we do it more efficiently? Do we still need to do it? Because we're not saying that we'll carry on doing everything forever. We're saying that we'll always look to get best value for residents. So that's the process. The risks are, as always, the risks are that we can do these MTFSs, and you can see it's a balanced budget for the next 2 years. We can have a fair degree of confidence. As you'll know from your period of time, looking beyond that, there's usually a gap that you look to see closing over the next 2 years, and we're in that world. But, there's a chancellor going to stand on his feet tomorrow. I have no idea what he's going to say. And although I probably ain't going to get anything from that, it will give me a good indication of, I think it's 15th of December, the local government spending review-ish. So we don't even know the date that he's going to tell us what we've got to do in February. So the risks are there, which is why we've taken, I hate the word prudent. I think we're trying to be a little bit less prudent because we've done quite a bit of work around assumptions to make sure that we're not in a situation or try and avoid a situation, I can't promise, that we're sitting on a huge underspend at the end of the year and think we could have done better stuff with that. Because you always get the best value when you properly plan it. So that's why we've kept what we've got on here. There are a load of great ideas in the minds of my cabinet colleagues and my own that we'd love to do, but we're not going to take risk with the council's future. At some point, I will hand over this to somebody else, and I want them to take it in a good condition and know that they've got choices and options as well, as your predecessor did and their predecessor before them. We are a very fortunate borough because of the expansion of the town in the late 60s, 70s, and the London Corporation buying up the land, and we've got to maintain that position. So I'm not being conservative, but I'm being something a bit like it.
Certainly, I think you mean conservative with a small c, maybe. Councillor Isaac?
Pragmatic.
Yeah, thank you.
Liberal pragmatism.
Thank you, Gavin, for that. And if I could turn to one of the sort of standout proposals in this, really, which is the investment in grounds maintenance and street cleansing services, and we're a bit of a there can't be any other council probably in the land that's about to increase its staff numbers by something in the order of 5%, with over 31 new members of staff, adding something in the order, as you said, £750,000 to the operational costs of the council. So it's brave, and I'm just wondering what it was that influenced you and your cabinet colleagues to say that as a borough we need to have so many more members of staff in the street cleansing and grounds maintenance teams. They do a great job, the existing team, and in fact they do such a good job that 67% of residents currently think that what's provided for street cleansing is pretty good. So I'm sort of slightly puzzled as to why the administration has decided to go large on street cleansing and grounds maintenance.
Because 67% of the public think they're very good, and they are, and our officers do a fantastic job. But that means there's 33% of residents who are totally are not satisfied yet with the service. And I think it's very interesting as we've gone round and we've gone to each other's wards and had a good round. There are pockets of areas where there are real challenges, and I mean some of that needs closer working with the housing associations, and that's already built into the budget as well, about having that role in place to make sure they're doing their end. But there are pockets of it, and our parks sometimes struggle. And I don't think we can ask the staff we've got to do any more to achieve the standard we're aiming for. So it is a priority. I want everyone to come to Basingstoke and say what an amazing, clean, tidy place it was. And so that's why we put it in there. It was felt that there was no cheaper way of doing it. Now, of course, it will be on ongoing evaluation of the effectiveness of that. I think the biggest challenge we're going to have actually is actually finding those 31 staff. But the overall 31 increase isn't all about street care, and obviously some of those staff increases are for 2-year fixed contracts in some of the roles. But in terms of street care, we believe it's the right thing to do. The public will judge us. The challenge, I think we'll probably be getting those staff in place because of the general shortage of labour in the area at the moment. But we thought it's the right thing to do because, like, if you look at all the scores that came through that survey that was done in preparation of the original council plan for this year, that was one of the lowest scores. Was around tidiness and cleanliness of our streets, and certainly my mailbox is filled up with it, and I guess most councillors are the same. So we thought it was a people's priority.
Yeah, one more.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So it's actually only 15% of the residents who are fairly or very dissatisfied with street cleansing. So I have to say personally, I'm not convinced that there are so many residents out there who really are beating down the door and wanting us to invest such large sums of money, because this is going to have a big impact on the overall finances of the council. This sort of level of expenditure, which is to a degree being paid by depleting our reserves, puts us in a projected position by 2027 under these budget proposals of having a deficit, a budget gap of 5.76 million, which causes me great concern, I have to say. Now, we probably hear that closing that gap is perfectly manageable, but it's a big gap, and this is year one in the new administration. So what happens in year 2 and year 3? So I'm concerned. But you mentioned that there are pockets where where residents are concerned about street cleansing. Can you give me some idea of where those pockets might be? Because I suppose my concern is that what we're talking about here is street cleansing in the urban areas, and I'm not really convinced that there's going to be much that's going to be beneficial for the rural areas, and you know, it's very much a rural borough. And you know, does that extend to Tadley and Kingsclear and Walton Hill and places like that? Are they going to see the benefits of this big increase in expenditure?
Well, I must say, I'm very pleased you keep talking about this is year one, and you'd be interested in what's going to happen to my next budget, and the one after that, and the one after that. I think you just told me a story there. But thank you very much for that vote of confidence. Much appreciated. I think we hope it's felt across the borough, because it's not just places where people live, it's places where people visit. And if you look at some of our parks, which are incredibly popular, incredibly busy, some of those will get benefit from this expenditure. And it will always be evaluated. Does it deliver value? We've got to ask that question about every single thing we do in this council every single day. Are we delivering value? I believe we are. If you look at your MTFS, the one you produced last year, and you look at 4 years ahead, can you remember what the value was that you were looking at in terms of the whole in finances?
Something like 1.81. Yeah.
Yeah. But what about 20? Yes, you can have 27, 28. I'm convinced that we will close that gap. We know it's there, and it will be closed. So don't worry. We've got it under control. We've got 2 years of balanced budget. There is no other authority. Having spoken to most of the other people in my position across Hampshire, nobody else has got 2-year balance, and I appreciate that's used as some of the underspend from previous years, but we're not here to sort of store money up. We want to deliver great services, and some of the money we're looking at spending certainly around the parks, better maintenance means lower cost and replacement in future years. Plus the other thing is we are restoring contribution to capital, which you cut to 2 million last year. So we are.
Thank you. Councillor Tustain, followed by Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair. I can't believe it, but there are elements of what Councillor Isaac said that I agree with. I actually was quite concerned about the huge increase from step 1 in the number of staff, because as we know, staff make up a huge cost. Personally, I really like what's in the budget, because this is an issue that I see, particularly in my ward. So speaking from a purely selfish perspective, you know, this is something that I'm really delighted to see that there is this big emphasis. What worries me, though, and I have been sort of looking into this, and I know there are issues from a statutory perspective, is how much enforcement we're doing. And in particular, I know you have mentioned there is work going with the housing associations, but personally, certainly within my ward, a lot of the areas we've got problems with is because of the poor service that's been delivered by Vivid with their street cleaning. I know they've got problems with their subcontractor, so I think it would be really nice to see that there's possibly more, if we're going to employ more people, that maybe there might be a little bit more emphasis on that strategic planning. The GIS element, I think, is welcome, because that will actually help us with that. Preventative plan stuff, and also getting more collaboration from the housing associations and the big landowners and the private landowners. I think actually by doing that may mean we actually load it on a preventative measure rather than throwing lots of staff at the other end. Because to be fair, I think the street guys that do, and ladies or lady that do our wards in the Basingstoke land actually do a reasonably good job. So that was my concern. There's other things actually, so before everybody on the other side of the room gets very excited, I think I'm talking about doing lots of cutting back here. There was on 1312, sorry, no, it's not, well, that's about penalty notices, also more enforcement as well, whether we should be looking at that and making sure we're actually doing effective enforcement on, I mean, I know we've done things with CCTV on fly tipping and stuff, but whether we can actually, you know, I mean, things even like litter drops and stuff like that. It's all those sorts of things. Commercial shops and stuff, are we going to look at making better enforcement with them? Because we have shop areas where the commercial owners and the landowners aren't necessarily cleaning up. So actually maybe looking at a preventative stuff, more collaboration and working smarter and holding people to account, particularly commercial owners. One thing I'll draw attention to the issue that's currently happening in the town with the rat problem, for example, and just reading some of the comments online about this. It sounds like a lot of these are around food establishments where they have a duty to make sure they're providing and cleaning up after themselves. So I think we need to look at that. There's also talk about we can cut back on the buses, because the state where we were subsidising on Stagecoach, and therefore they're now proving to be commercially successful. What I would like us to consider would be whether or not that money could be utilised in areas where there may actually be more need for public transport, so we can actually, rather than cutting that out, put that in somewhere else, so that we can actually improve the transport into some, maybe again more possibly rural areas, to allow for everyone to have access. I think there's one more point as well, was around, is there funding in this on like replacement planting and stuff? We're getting a lot of people in to do these things, but I don't know if that would come into the general budget itself, because we talk about the FTEs, but certainly having more people coming and just tidying it up and hacking it down when we've got areas that really could do with some replanting schemes. That would be lovely to see something around that one as well. I think that will do for now, thank you.
We're just coming back on the planting thing. Yeah, there is a scheme in place that is going to go around. Obviously, we're maintaining what's there. We are looking at those areas that are constantly a problem, and can we rip them out? It's a massive amount of work and a massive job that will take years and years to get around the entire borough, especially once you've worked out whether it's your land, county land, housing association, or land that's just simply been forgotten, as we occasionally have across wards. But that piece of work is going on, but that's going to be one of those that the benefit of that is probably going to be seen a long way down the road, because some schemes just take forever, and we wouldn't be able to put the resources into it to make an instant difference. And once you've done it, you've got those resources. You don't need them anymore. So, but it's on in there within it, but it's a bit of a smaller programme that takes a while.
Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair. I have got quite a few questions, but I'll do what Councillor Isaac did and just ask some. Let the rest of the room ask theirs and then come back in if needs be. Thank you, Gavin, for your opening comments, and I hope you don't mind me addressing you by first name terms. It does feel a bit strange calling you co-leader when Paul is addressed as leader. It's a little bit like a Animal Farm. Are some more equal than others? But Councillor Isaac's question has piqued my interest, because if I'm honest, I actually don't see many of your priorities in this document. If I give you an example, I know you pushed quite hard for an amendment at the last budget to extend concessionary bus travel, but it's not really mentioned here. So just out of interest, because I am fairly new, how did your budget planning session go? Was it a meeting of equals?
It was. The reason for the bus subsidy last year was simply that I didn't want us to be freezing council tax, because 10p a week to the average resident was very little. £250,000 to this local authority is significant. And I would say it's not £250,000 just, it's every single year for the rest of time until they change the way you can increase council tax. That's cost us £250,000 every single year. So that was the only reason behind it. It was a very quick, I've seen the budget, they're planning on freezing council tax. I think that's a dangerous move. I think it's borderline reckless. What do I come up quickly that we can justify putting it up and keeping it up, and obviously the 2 years bus travel. As it happens at the same time, the government introduced a £2 ticket thing, which is part of the reason why our buses are no longer requiring subsidy, because they're commercial. Obviously, we've found that £2 is the perfect rate to maximise people using the buses, so it didn't need to be a priority this year for us. Want to see what county did as well, because obviously actually they get paid by the Department of Transport to provide some subsidy buses. So at the moment it wasn't needed. So last year was just literally an opposition amendment to try and make sure that we didn't take a short-term decision of just freezing council tax for 1 year for very little, well, for a lot of pain and very little gain. But we did it anyway, so that was why.
Okay, thanks. And yes, I do acknowledge the £2 bus fare to get around is a very good scheme. It's certainly popular in my ward. So I had a good read of your MTFS, and I had a good read of Councillor Isaac's MTFS at the same time last year. And to me, my amateur eye, the 23-24 budget emphasised efficiency and value for money. Do you think your budget continues this commitment, and how are you proposing that efficiency measures are going to be implemented or improved upon?
Yes, that's never been lost. It's not our money, it's taxpayers' money, albeit most of it comes from other sources. But it's every penny we spend, we should spend well. And that has been a long-term approach in this council. The heads of service within this council all have that in the back of their minds. They will continue to have it in the back of their minds. The problem, the possible difference is, we're saying, can we do things more efficiently to free up money to do something else even better, rather than can we do things more efficiently to try and shrink how much we spend overall, because we think the council is a source of good when it does things well. So we're not looking to constantly make cuts, but we're happy to make efficiencies, because it means we can drive money into other areas.
Yeah, I'll ask one more and then I'll let somebody else have a go. You sat there and you told us you don't know what the Chancellor's going to say tomorrow. I don't either. I'd like to know. And you admit to us that the risks are there. You've told us, don't worry, but you then said you don't want to store money up. And I'll be honest with you, I am concerned, because it seems to me a little bit like robbing Peter to pay Paul, only in this case, Peter's all of Basingstoke. I'm just a little bit worried the budget proposes using reserves to fund several ongoing commitments and initiatives. Can you explain how this aligns with best practices in financial management? Because I certainly don't think potential depletion of reserves for reoccurring expenses rather than one-time investments or emergencies is best practice.
I think Sue would like to comment on that one.
So I think, just to clarify, reserves are not being used on a recurring basis to fund any element of the budget. In terms of these budget proposals, funding was put into reserves at the end of the last financial year as a result of a significant surplus. That money was put aside specifically to fund ongoing service improvements linked to the provision of trying to achieve the priorities under the council plan. Some of the risk reserves that exist, in part, one of them is for non-achievable savings. So, as already noted this evening, within the budget, there are 3 savings proposals that are coming out, and they are funded for 2 years from the risk reserve that's held for that purpose. The assumption is then it has to be funded through normal revenue practices. So the reason why you have a budget gap in the 3rd and 4th year of the current MTFS period is because it does not assume that they will continue to be funded through reserves, and that actually there is a budget gap that needs to be met in order for those activities to continue.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Sue. It's I think it's what we've all understood here as well, is that there is that gap there that we don't understand yet when it's going to be funded. So yeah, thank you for the clarification.
Right, Councillor Carr. Councillor Furthermore after that.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to talk about prudence. It was interesting that the co-leader mentioned that he didn't wish to be prudent, that he wished to be less conservative with a small c, if that was my understanding. Because I think to deliver a budget, to deliver sound and safe public finances requires prudence as a really basic value. And I think it's concerning to me that the Liberal Democrats don't intend to be prudent with the finances. That he also then comes along and tells us that we should trust him. We should trust him, we should have faith in him, that he will close the very significant 5.76 million budget gap that is opened by the proposals in his MTFS. So I am concerned about whether our public finances in Basingstoke and Deane are now in good hands. Because I think if we look at this, the first year of this administration, a decision is made to raise the cost of this council by about 7.5%. And as Councillor Isaac has said, to achieve this involves the use of our reserves for operational costs rather than those one-off costs. And that is concerning to me. And I'd like to put to the portfolio holder a question relating to those reserves. What sort of assessment has been made of the risks that might arise from greater pressure on this borough council by that deficit if, say, by 25 or so, the county council is in a more difficult place, as we know it may be, with the growing pressures of social care and others. You know, when we know those costs are coming down the track, what kind of thinking has gone on in his team, by him, about what the risk might be of opening a deficit, using up our reserves at this point, when we know that there will be greater challenges facing us? And I'll have one further question in a moment.
Well, if I start with the first bit about the prudence comment, it's very much associated with someone called Gordon Brown, who you may remember, who always used the word prudent. So I don't like to be associated with Gordon Brown because I just don't think I'm a grumpy-looking Scotsman. So that's the expression I was using. Obviously, within this, it's all about, I've got children, I want them to have even greater opportunity and greater resources than I've had. So, of course, I want the borough to succeed, and of course, I will be the guardian of the finances to make sure that we end up in we maintain our current level of financial strength, which is why there are good ideas that didn't make it through. So, I just want to clarify, you did misunderstand me there about my views on the word prudent. It's just the use of it I didn't like, but you can look through this and you can see we have been careful. The other thing to mention is that the rules around finance for local authorities are very different. We have to balance the budget. There is no constantly dragging through reserves. I know Hampshire County Council, the Conservative Hampshire County Council, are using £78 million of reserves this year to balance their budget, and they use £45 million next year, and the following year they'll have nothing left. So we're not doing that. It's been very modest tweaking of finances. But I'll hand over to the 151 officer because she's got a legal responsibility to make sure that I'm not reckless with it.
Sue, please.
Sorry, yes, so if I can just pick some of that up. So the report you see this evening is around the budget proposals that the administration are putting forward in terms of the MTFS and budget that goes in my name in February. And that's the full update of the MTFS that looks at all the underlying assumptions. It has my section 25 statement in there in terms of my view around the robustness of the estimates. It has the update in terms of my risk. I do the assessment on the risk reserves in terms of what I feel is appropriate for the council. So obviously my role as 151 officer is clearly to support and advise the administration in terms of how we set the budget, but it's also to be mindful that I need to make sure that I am making sure the council has a balanced budget every year, and to have in my own mind how I feel that potentially any future budget gaps can be closed. So this is a two-pronged approach really in terms of trying to support and advise the administration in terms of supporting the council priorities and how we fund them, but also keeping one eye on the finances of the council and ensuring prudent financial management and protecting the future. And I can certainly assure you that we are not funding operational activity out of reserves. And as I say, the risk reserves are assessed by me based on what I think they should be, and that's what goes in my robustness statement within the budget report.
Councillor Carr, there was one more, I believe.
Thank you for that, Sue and Gavin. I think, Sue, I think your robustness will be very necessary given the way in which this administration is going thus far. So I wish you all the best of luck. It's also true to say, of course, that politicians, especially this new Liberal Democrat agenda of raising the cost of this council, needs to be very carefully monitored. So I wish you all the best of luck in that. I think it's true to say that while I hear your reassurance, Sue, I think we are still in a position where we see a 5.76 deficit at the end of this MTFS period. And I think there is a real question for residents of Basingstoke and Dean about what will be done to close that deficit. What will be done to ensure that our finances are kept in a stable state? So I hope to see further reassurance in the coming weeks about that. My final question is really just to say sort of what steps are we going to be taking to replenish, to ensure that we are in a stable position when we come to that deficit? What actual concrete steps? Because we've heard a lot about we will definitely, we will absolutely reassure you of this, but what concrete steps are going to be taken to close that deficit?
Well, I think one of the things you do is you monitor. As I mentioned at the outset, we do the MTFS so we can plan in advance. Now, what we don't know is what's going to happen to government funding, interest rates, etc. So whilst that gap sits there now, we would expect for our activities of always looking to where can we be more efficient and effective, what more money comes from central government, how more effective we are at collecting council tax, etc., what happens to inflation, what happens to interest rates, what happens to income from property, etc. We will have a better idea next year, and if that's come down significantly, then we don't have to do anything substantial. If it doesn't, then clearly we will have to look at more. So the whole point of having MTFS, if that was sitting this year, you'd have a concrete answer about what we're doing about it. But the fact that we're seeing it 3-4 years ahead means that we've got ample time to see how that comes through. It's not unusual for year 4. In fact, most authorities have a significant gap for year 2 of their MTFS. So it's not unusual to have a significant gap in year 4. It's just if it becomes if it's still a significant gap in year 2, at that point we'll be able to give you some concrete.
Sue?
I think if I can add to that as well, in terms of the February papers, you have the full MTFS document, which has all the horizon scanning and all the understanding in terms of the assumptions that we make over that full 4-year period. There are a number of factors at the moment that are unknown, and we'll see tomorrow from the autumn statement whether any of those are answered. I'll be honest, I'm not expecting them to be, given the sort of national political position. And therefore we can only make assumptions around what we're fairly confident on in the next couple of years. That is not to say that those assumptions won't actually flow through to the further years. We just don't know that with any real assurance at the current time. So, political issues aside, as a 151 officer, I'm obviously aware that there are a number of factors that, without making any other savings or changes to services, will change that overall bottom line. And at the current time, we expect that to improve, not to worsen. So, as Councillor James has indicated, it's to a certain extent, it's how far I'm comfortable to say that certain assumptions will continue without actually understanding with any real certainty what they are. But I would certainly expect some of those to flow through and to close that budget gap.
Thank you. Now moving to Councillor Finnemore.
Thank you, Chair. Question to the portfolio holder. Would you agree that all our residents are under pressure from a Conservative government created cost of living crisis, and previous council tax freezes by this administration impacts on our residents in terms of what services they receive? And in answer to Councillor Isaac's point about rural services, we support this new administration's reversal of the shifting of the responsibility of costs of toilets onto other organisations, the parish councils, and also the sustainability of our village communities and businesses and services by removing charges for car parking. They're all limited. I mean, our minimal £5 increase in council tax will pale into significance when you see what the police, fire and Hampshire County Council are probably going to load us with. But it's all about what we do for our residents, and I support what we do for our residents. Hope the portfolio will agree.
I do agree, particularly about the removal of rural car parking charges. One of the things we know, that, use an example, if you live in Kingsclear, you shop in Kingsclear. If you live in some of the villages around Kingsclear, you need to drive to Kingsclear. If you start charging money for parking, those customers start thinking, do I go to Newbury, do I go to Tadley, do I go to Andover, Basingstoke, the bigger areas, at which point those rural businesses, that's the difference in rural business thriving and collapsing. And if you lose those village shops, small town shops, then everyone has to migrate to a big town, big city, which means that what we've done there is an amazingly green policy. It sounds bizarre and counterintuitive, but removing those car parking charges, I think, will make those villages more sustainable locations. So I'm pleased with doing that. In terms of the cost of living, I can't put it all at the government's doorstep. That would be unfair. There has been a cost of living crisis. There has been a period of high inflation. Obviously, I'm sure my Conservative colleagues will confirm inflation, when it went up, had nothing to do with them. It was down to COVID. It was down to the war in Ukraine. It was down to other things. And now it's come down. I'm sure they equally won't be trying to take any credit at all for the downturn in inflation, because clearly it's the Bank of England managing interest. It'd be silly to claim credit for it, I'm sure.
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. So we heard from portfolio holder, we don't know what sort of a level of funding might be by the central government down the line, and the risks of picking up some of the county councils' shortfalls. But he still expect us to sort of go ahead and agree on a budget gap of 5.76 million. So my question is, has a thorough assessment has been conducted on a long-term financial plan or implications of the policy changes introduced in this 24-25 budget, especially to compare with the previous Conservative administration's budget? So what kind of or level of risks involved in this current budget to the previous the budgets? Thank you.
If we could just go back to that point about what this paper actually is, it's about our current budget proposal. So there's nothing in there that says we're going to pick stuff up from the county. The county have their own financial issues, that's for them and their 151 officers to deal with, and for the government to react and do something about. At this stage, we are not planning to become a unitary or take any county responsibilities from them. We have our duties and our responsibilities, and we will look to provide good services to fulfil those duties and responsibilities. So I think there's a bit of a confused picture there. As has been said before, the accuracy of what we know we're getting improves over time. With each government announcement, we've got a fairer idea. So a lot of the assumptions that are made within this document around government funding actually assumes it's on a declining level. We've made some assumptions around inflation that will be coming down very slowly or fairly slowly. The interest rates, which affect our revenue income, we've made an assumption that they're 5.75 now, they're going to go to 5.25, they're going to go 4.25 in a year, 3. All those things are assumptions. And those assumptions are the best we can forecast at the current time. As Sue's alluded to, that's something her and her team spend a lot of time doing, is actually getting more of those firmed up as we understand more about government announcements, government funding policies, they will work out. And so we've got a more accurate picture as we get to February. This may look like, pretty different in terms of our proposals and what we're discussing. The actual MTFS and those numbers at the bottom could look quite different by the time we get there. So these are today very much looking at proposals as are they the right proposals for the borough? Because the rest of it, there's a whole load more work to do. We've got at least 2 significant government financial statements coming out between now and 1st of April when we actually have to sort of implement this budget.
Yeah, very quickly.
Can I just
Councillor,
quickly
I've now
go
got
back
3
on
more
that?
speakers.
So you made assumptions on few or many factors around while you're going through this, but not having anything about Hampshire County Council's projection or shortfalls that you probably may have to. Isn't that something that we probably should have made some sort of an assumptions around?
Sue?
If I may. So these are about the proposal. This report is very much about the administration's proposal at the current time. The MTFS document, the full strategy document, looks at the horizon scanning and picks up all of those aspects. So, for example, we are doing an analysis of the county's budget proposals. We know there are several areas which potentially would impact on service delivery within the council. The service areas are currently looking at what that looks like in terms of how we continue to provide that service and proposals around the levels of those service. And that feeds into the update of the actual MTFS strategy document that comes in February. So, for example, just picking on one, around social inclusion, it's something we've known about for a number of years, and the services have been preparing for that in terms of how we might be able to transit if that situation occurs. So that comes back to what one of your first points, which is the longer term financial planning. So whilst the MTFS covers a 4-year period, we look at financial planning on a 10-year period, and we're always looking at current issues when they may come into fruition. So another big one would be waste, for example. So we're constantly building that into our kind of thought process. With some of those, you're going to get some form of transition funding and support, and some of them you may think we're not going to, because actually our service is over and above what we need to provide. So again, all of those discussions need to happen once we have some, assurance that that funding may cease, for example. But the MTFS document itself does pick up a number of those issues in terms of what's coming over the hill, what we're doing about it, and how we need to pick that up going forward.
A very short response.
If I may quickly, thanks, Chair. So my second part of the question was: have you done any sort of a comparison with the previous Conservative administration's budget in terms of level of risks, what we've got in front of us to what we've achieved over the past few years?
So we look at each budget. We look at the risks from each budget that we take forward. So in terms of the proposals, each proposal may have risks around it. We wouldn't necessarily compare that to the previous year's administration's proposals, for example. We would look at what is the impact of this proposal on the council's finances, and whether that's reputational risk, whether that's political risk, whatever it might be. We look at all of those things per proposal, and obviously I will then make a statement in terms of what I think the overall risks are. but it's not. You wouldn't compare it with the previous year because the proposals are different, and therefore it's not like for like.
Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad that Councillor James raised assumptions in the model. I think whenever you're trying to build a 3 or 4 year or 5 year model, you get increased variability the further out you go. You have to look at the sort of Bank of England's interest rate projections, and they kind of get, they stay very close early on, and they get develop quite a range later on. And it's the assumptions that make the difference. There's a few in there that I guess I just wanted some reassurance around, and one that I was just a little bit concerned about and wanted a bit more understanding. And it ties in with the comment in 9.1, which talks about using a detailed financial model. I completely appreciate that Sue and her team use a detailed financial model, but I just wanted to understand a bit more about how it was constructed, if you could, Sue, because I think it's to some extent it's how you stress test the model, isn't it? To some extent, it's if you change one of these assumptions a bit, what happens? I think is it called optimization testing, variance testing. The MTF assumption that caused me some concern was that number 2, inflation, and we've assumed 0% per annum except 3% on contracted services, etc. I'm trying to find the reference, but later on in the paper, I think it talks about the fact that historically we've consistently underrun budgets and ended up with a surplus. And so inflation was being taken out of this model to help deal with the fact that we have that constant overrun problem. Have I understood that correctly? If you talk a bit about that, thank you.
So just picking up that point first. So what this is saying is that we have 3 main elements of inflation. One is pay inflation, one is contract inflation, and that contract inflation includes things like utilities, etc. Those that have the appropriate inflation assumptions built in. So, for example, where there's a contract inflation, it will be whatever that contract inflation is. If there isn't a specific one, we assume 3%, and obviously we've got a separate assumption around what we think pay inflation will be. What we tend to find is that there are a number of small budgets, so for example in supplies and services and things like that, so they're not paying for major contracted services or external services, for example. They might be stationery, for example. We inherently just give everybody 3% on those budgets, and actually what we find is they don't spend them because actually over a period of time we undertake a number of, whether it's service improvements, whether it's digital enablement, the spend patterns change, and all that we're doing actually is just increasing people's budgets and they're not being spent. So what that's saying is actually what we'll do is we'll hold within the risk reserves an element for inflation, but actually as a starting point we won't put inflation into individual budgets. If something comes up that's exceptional, we can then assess it on an individual basis rather than just blanketly applying it as an additional cost every year within the MTFS, and then getting to the year end and finding that we have a potential sort of £400,000 or £500,000 underspend because that inflation has not been necessary for the type of expenditure it's linked to. And then just picking up your point around, yes, you're right, there are a number of key assumptions in here. So section 19 of the report, which looks at risk management, does pick up some of those assumptions in terms of what the impact of a 1% change would be, in terms of looking at some of that sensitivity analysis. And we certainly flow that through into the MTFS full document as well, in terms of what does that look like, and that also helps to inform the risk assessment that I also do in terms of risk overall. So, the risk reserves that we hold for inflation, rent, investment income, etc.
Thank you, Sue. That makes sense to me. I've got some experience of doing budgets and seeing the same sort of thing. I sort of corollary question really there is, do you think that helps drive value for money in some of those smaller budgets as people focus more on how they spend if they don't get the automatic 3% uplift? Just looking at the sensitivity analysis, which was the word that was escaping me, thank you. Our highest impact of a 1% change is employees. And our assumption on employees is 4% pay settlement, and then 3, and then 2. The thing I didn't say about inflation last time was it's often referred to as the genie in the bottle, and I think that and I hope I'm wrong, but I think that talks of inflation coming down and becoming manageable, based on the news of the last week or so, is potentially a little bit premature. And I just think we need to keep our eye on inflation, and I think that that will feed into whatever happens with this budget, and hence what the MTFS looks like next year with the extra year added, and how that £2 or £5 million potential deficit is addressed. Of course, and then we'll have the picture on any extra government funding. Thank you.
No, I completely agree that they are some of those really key assumptions, and for example, the pay inflation has not been changed since last year. We're still making the assumption that we're not in a position as yet to start thinking about reducing those overall assumptions. So we've left them at the higher level. But you're absolutely right. It's these key big ones that will change the some of the gap, if you like, at the end of the MTFS.
Yep, sure.
If I may, very quickly, I share other members' concerns about the additions to headcount. I think we absolutely do need more street care services. I do not dispute that, and more grounds maintenance. It's a huge issue in our ward, but I do think that it's quite it's a bold recruitment plan.
Thank you. Councillor Isaac.
Thank you, Chairman. I do. This committee is doing its job. These are draft proposals, and I think we're approaching this constructively and looking to help the portfolio holder. I'm concerned that in time to come we may say, well, these proposals to increase the number of staff will actually be regarded as something that was a bridge too far, and I've been in Councillor James's position during a pandemic, so emergencies happen. We've been through cost of living crisis, which we're still going through, and with inflation, that genie's not back in the bottle by any means. So I am concerned about the fact that what we're proposing here is going to reduce our overall financial resilience. The county is in a very parlous financial position. They've said that publicly. We all know that, and so it's not going to be just a straightforward case of saying, well, those services that the county provides, if they withdraw them from our residents, because we share residents, that we're going to stand by and do nothing. We of course we're going to be conscious of any impact on our residents and take action as appropriate. So we need this sort of resilience, I'm afraid, in ahead of us. Just turning to one point, Councillor James, you made you're very complimentary about Councillor Phillamore's point about car parking charges in rural areas, but at a time when the high street is in real difficulty across the land, and we've got our principal shopping centre in administration, was there any thought given to, say, just freezing our parking charges as part of these budget proposals? Was that looked at, or was it looked at and you decided that actually that wasn't a priority?
It's not in the priorities at the moment. The fees and charges does go in a different direction. Again, it comes to a different committee. I'm not sure when that comes in. The assumption within the budget proposals is that there'll be a 3% increase across the board. As I said earlier, some certain charges you're not going to put a £1 parking ticket up by 3p because that just becomes very, very awkward to pay. So we'll look at that when it comes back. We're always trying to get the balance right with our parking, recognising that we want to support our town centre. We want a thriving town centre. One of the challenges, of course, is that one of our shopping centres is in receivership. That shopping centre relies very heavily on parking income. So if we were to drop our car parking prices, we're going to make their financial position worse. And I still think that the town centre is sustainable. And if you start making it even cheaper to drive than it is to catch a bus, we're not going to get people to shift onto more sustainable models of transport. So there's a difficult balancing act around parking in terms of making sure we support our revenue, because obviously we'd have to build that loss of revenue into the MTFS as well, which is at the moment something I don't think we could afford to do. We'd also have to factor in the impact it would have on both the Mals and Festival Place in terms of their viability, and also the impact on the climate. If you suddenly turn around and said, actually don't catch a bus, you can drive for free, and what impact that has on the roads around the town and the air quality, etc. So it's not an easy decision. So at the moment, the fees and charges are sitting at 3%, and we haven't pulled it out as something we'd make a significant exception to.
Yeah, Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, just one quick part. I'm advised that if we were to freeze our car parking charges as a council, it would only cost us £70,000 a year to do that.
Councillor McIntyre.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to go back to the clarification from Sue that in our role as 151 officer, she'll be keeping our, I was going to say BDI, but you don't have BDI, Sue, so you'll be keeping your eye on the fiscal plans and providing a bit of scrutiny there, so that is a bit reassuring. I do still keep coming back to this significant shortfall, though. And I do share others' concerns, not just on this side of the table. I think it's both sides of the table have expressed concerns that the budget proposals include this significant increase in staffing levels. I'm concerned we don't have a long-term plan for funding these positions. So, question for Gavin again. Can you tell me how the expansions and services outlined in your budget will be sustained in the long run without leading to financial strain or the need for cuts in other areas when, as you said yourself, you have to hand it over to someone else?
Well, I think that it comes from its balance for the next 2 years. We expect to see that the gaps will come down as we have more certainty about the funding available to us. Like any administration, any household, anything, you're going to be watching those numbers very closely. And if we get to a point where we find that our resources may not match the services we want to deliver, of course, like any organisation, any administration, you then have a review of your services and select the ones that you felt were lower priority. We don't think we're in that position. This council has not been in that position before. We don't think this initial investment, the increase in investment that we've made, is something we're going to have to change. We think it can be absorbed within the budgets and the other activities of this council. So at the present time, we think, and that's why we've put what we've put in place. We've limited ourselves to what we've got. We've not gone. There are lots to say. I said earlier, lots of very good ideas that we have about improving things, but we can't fit them all within the current resources of this council. So that's why we've taken the approach. I don't like using the word prudent to say this is where we're limited. So again, you go back to Councillor Isaac's point, it is a political choice that yes, of course, you could reduce car parking charges in the town centre, but there's a cost to doing that. So you choose a priority, and if we think that cleaning our streets, cutting grass, appreciate, as a political group, you may take a different view, and it might be about parking, but you can't do them both. So one is about making sure that you get the revenue in to support services, and then providing those services. You can, of course, cut services and you can cut revenue. It's a political choice, and I say from the outset, we want to see an improvement in service delivery. We think there's a lot of services we can, as a council, provide that offer great value for money and really enhance living in this borough for a very small price. Others would rather cut parking charges. That's, so it's all a choice.
Councillor McIntyre.
Thanks. I do agree with you, Gavin, that this council hasn't been in a difficult position before, and I would argue that's most probably down to 17 years of prudent financial management, but thank you.
I know you're new here, but if you go back and check your records, there was previous to that a joint administration that also ran the finances very effectively for many years, that handed them over to the Conservatives in 2008. So we are a very fortunate borough in the sense that we have no borrowing. So we have no interest to pay, but we have interest that comes in. That revenue supports our budget. It's not an act of political genius that we have that. That's a historical advantage that we have, one that we're determined to maintain. And as I say, Councillor Isaac maintained it, his predecessor did, so did his predecessor. I will maintain it as well.
Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. I had 2 points actually. One is an observation about the 2.5 FTE headcount addition to property services in order to manage our increased property portfolio. I think that's most welcome. We see on Audit Committee huge or material numbers in the property area, and so further investment in maintenance and custody of those assets is most welcome. The request is, when we talk about property returns and investment returns, that this is a cost that is netted off of the returns, rather than a cost that is buried further down the P&L, because it's clearly a cost of generating those incomes. The second point I had was with regards to, and I've been listening carefully to what people have been saying, and it's raised. So looking 3 or 4 years out in the MTFS, I am less concerned than others around the financial modelling. I'm aware of some of the other things that can come in and happen, but quite a lot can change in 12 to 24 months. However, the council tax reduction scheme and the non-domestic rates discretionary relief, I think in my mind there's a conflict here, because there's it's important to give tax reliefs to the most challenged or the worst off in our society, or amongst our residents. But on the other hand, I think Councillor James referred earlier to the government allows 80% deduction, and this council chooses to fund the other 20%. If we have residents and business owners who are essentially paying no council tax, they have no stake in local society, and I think that's I'm very uncomfortable with that. And when you look at I think the business rates one in particular, £110,000 a year rolling from 25-26. That's a chunk of money. That's a 6-figure number. So that would go some way towards plugging the gap out in 25, 26, 27, 28. And the former administration was sensible enough to defer decisions on that for a year. Here I see that both of those things have been abandoned. If this is a consultation where we can genuinely be listened to, then my recommendation, or I would ask Cabinet to consider deferring those again for another year on the basis of the cost of living crisis, which I think is the justification for removing them, so that they could potentially be back on the table in 12 months' time when we look at this stuff again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Basham.
I'll just come back. I'll take on that point written down. We'll have a look at that. In relation to the difficulty of putting those property staff in at that stage of the P&L, if you like, is that obviously we have more than one kind of property. Investment is a significant part of our property, but we've obviously, we've had a community centre, we're hunting for rack wherever we go. We've got an anvil, we've got a Haymarket, we've got all our sort of operational sites, including this building. So they're not specifically surveying just the investment sites, they'll be broadly working across the property piece. So it's very hard to sort of separate how much work went into the investment bit and how much was into the community or operational assets.
Thank you, Councillor James. I think it's just an observation that our properties and our increasing investment income from properties are not without cost, and so I think we just need to be careful when we, property it does generate better returns than cash generally. But we just need to be careful we don't let that run away with itself and overstate the returns because we're not counting all the costs. I appreciate the pragmatic difficulties of separating it out and apportioning the cost and so on, and where it sits in the P&L.
Second. Thank you. Now, you put a proposal to the portfolio holder to possibly consider deferring that for another year. Now, that should be adopted properly, I think, in the committee. Nope. Because it's the recommendations to Cabinet?
So this will form part of the consultation responses. So this will be noted in the Cabinet report in February in terms of the comments from Scrutiny Committee. And in terms of pulling together the final proposals that go forward in February, these will be considered. And anything that's changed will be detailed in the Cabinet report as appropriate.
Fine. How do we record it? In the minutes?
Just in the minutes.
In the minutes. Okay. Thanks very much. As long as that works that way. Councillor Hussain.
It's just a comment. I believe it is covered, but it's just wanted to get some clarity from the portfolio holder around the 13.15, which is about the bank charges and what we're doing to try and encourage people to go to direct debit rather than keep paying by card. Because I think this is obviously it's a cost we've got, and it's a simple one to resolve.
So this is a recognition that obviously we've gone from having cash kiosks, which have now gone, encouraging people to pay through different channels. We actively encourage everyone who can pay by direct debit to pay by direct debit. Obviously, this is a staged channel shift, if you like, from moving from cash to some form of electronic payment to now trying to move as many people as possible to direct debits. I think there's still a shift in terms of the direct debit is a definite sum coming out of somebody's account every month, and some people still want to have the ability to pay when they want to pay. So obviously part of the ongoing conversation between officers and all of our customers is about how we can encourage them to move over, making it as easy as possible for them, helping them to make that switch, but just being mindful of the fact that there's still an element of choice without the direct debit that people may want to retain. So that's just an ongoing activity that we continue to work with people, particularly to kind of just help with their budgeting and things like that in terms of, if you pay by direct debit, it's definitely coming out. So it's an ongoing piece of work, but I think this is just reflective of the fact that we've moved from cash to banking differently, and now we need to move them, where we can, onto that direct debit type approach.
Do we know how many, as a sort of percentage, is of people paying council tax that this actually affects? Is it a big number of people?
I need to check. Last time I think I had a conversation about this, it was circa 50%, but obviously that probably has moved. So we do have a significant number of people that pay by direct debit, but obviously I'll get that updated number and send it around to the committee.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on the conversation that we've been having this evening, I would like to put forward a motion for the Scrutiny Committee to consider, one which I should think would benefit from a vote, so that view from the Scrutiny Committee either way can go forwards to Cabinet to consider. So with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, my proposed motion is this. This Scrutiny Committee is deeply concerned by the administration's proposed budget and MTFS, expresses concern about the drawdown on reserves, questions whether the significant increase in spending is responsible, given that it will open up a budget gap of 5.76 million and reduce financial resilience, queries whether the considerable increases in staffing are financially sustainable over the long term, and recommends that the Cabinet outline a concrete plan to close the budget deficit it has created. And obviously I'm very happy to forward that to Julia at the appropriate time.
So,
So I think just to clarify around that point, in terms of closing the budget gap, we wouldn't seek to close the budget gap over 4 years of the MTFS. Normally we'd be seeking to close it for 1 year, and obviously the current proposed budget, as recommended and supported by officers, is closing it for 2 years. I would not be comfortable as 151 officer to be making a number of assumptions that are so far into the future as to try and close the budget gap in the final year. The budget report does talk about the multi-pronged approach that we as officers are supporting all members, in particular the administration, in terms of setting the budget. We provide that support and advice, but there is no way as 151 officer I would support a position of trying to close the budget gap in 4 years' time when we have such uncertainty around what that looks like, and therefore all we can do is refer back to the multi-pronged approach that we take in terms of looking at that on an ongoing basis as part of our financial management.
Councillor Bound.
I've sat here all evening and I've listened to the people opposite. In no way does what Councillor Carr has just said, for me, summarise what this committee has said this evening. And there's no way that I could vote for anything like that whatsoever. It's ridiculous.
Okay, thank you for the comment. I think what Sue was trying to explain was I don't think as worded that motion would get anywhere. But I think possibly if we could agree something, if you want to continue with the proposal of the motion. Sue?
So I don't think you can raise a motion here because the motion goes to council for consideration by cabinets, doesn't it? You can raise a recommendation here in order to send that to another committee. So if Councillor Carr wishes to make a recommendation on behalf of himself and his own group or any other members that wish to do it, it will be recorded as part of the minutes and will be considered as part of the scrutiny feedback on consultation.
Which is why before I said it would be a part of the recommendation of Cabinet. Now, if you're prepared to put that down in writing as a recommendation from whomever wants to agree with that recommendation, if we get a majority within the room, because that's what it is, or you could do it on your own basis, or as Sue has suggested, from the Conservative members of the committee, that's not a problem. But it has to go as a recommendation to, in this case, Cabinet. That's kind of a question for me here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Sue, for the sort of constitutional explainer. That's very useful to understand. So my suggestion then would be removing that final point. So perhaps it ends with to reduce the budget deficit rather than close. And I think I would suggest reframing it as this scrutiny committee recommends that the administration revisit its proposed budget and MTFS on the following grounds. A, concern about the drawdown on reserves. B, questions regarding the significant increase in spending and the impact this will have on our budget gap and our financial resilience. C, queries whether the considerable increases in staffing and whether they are financially sustainable over the long term. And yeah, so that would be how I'd suggest recommending the putting forwards.
So
I still think it's the minutes will note all of the conversation here this evening in terms of those recommendations. That doesn't feel like a recommendation. It feels like a series of questions in terms of pulling together. And I think some of that is officer-led rather than cabinet-led. So therefore there is a confusion in some of what's being requested. So I think it's certainly it's within the members' right to say that they wish to ask Cabinet to reconsider, but this report is very much about the proposals, and it's to reconsider the proposals and the impact those proposals have on the budget gap, and if those proposals are drawing down on reserves, etc., and how they're funded. So I think it's a perfectly acceptable kind of request, but it's just how it's being worded in terms of a recommendation from committee or from an individual, in terms of it's how the proposals impact on those things and how they will perhaps add risk to being able to close the budget gap in future years.
thank you, Councillor McIntyre.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sue, for that clarification. I'm more than happy to second Councillor Carr's motion. I still think recommendation. I still think there's flexibility there for Cabinet to ignore it if necessary, but it expresses the concerns I have and the concerns I've heard. It might not necessarily reflect with others, but I think if we put that to a vote, then at least we will determine that, and if necessary, then Cabinet can reflect on it, but it's entirely within Cabinet's power to disregard our recommendations if necessary. I would second Councillor Carr's recommendation. I'd like that to go to a vote, please.
Yeah, constitutionally, I don't know that a vote is really necessary, bearing in mind what you've just said, Sue, that we've recorded the comments made, haven't we? or it could be, yeah, because you can always push off a minority. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be a majority. This is the way things happen. But I haven't come across this one before. Not on a recommendation.
From the proposal, we're seeking the views, and that doesn't mean we have to seek one united view. We are seeking views.
Exactly.
Notes are being written, because everything that comes
exactly.
in, you're part of the consultation that's going out to the public.
Yeah.
So the public aren't out there now having a big vote amongst all 16 people that are likely to respond to the consultation, but they're not having a vote. They'll all come up with their own thing. So we've taken everybody's comment that's spoken tonight. We can watch it back and capture any more on the webcast. So you can have a vote if you want, but it's not going to change anything, because if one person tells me I'm a bit worried about this and how it impacts on my ward, I've got a responsibility to listen to that and reflect upon that and make sure that we're doing the best we can within the budget.
And that's what I was trying to get to. Yeah. But thank you very much, Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, I just think that this is a scrutiny committee, and it's going to be more influential if a recommendation is one that's supported by the committee, rather than just being noted as something that Councillor Carr put forward. Yeah.
So,
I'd also like to remind everyone that obviously in my role as 151 officer, I'm here to support everybody, not just the administration. And we are doing the round of all of the budget consultations discussions with the groups. Each of the group leaders have been asked if they would like, as in previous years, for me to come and talk to the groups about how the budget is set and some of the assumptions that underpin that. So I'd be very happy to come to any of the groups and discuss with members how we get to some of those assumptions, and that they are officer recommendations, perhaps in some circumstances, rather than a political discussion around the proposals.
Councillor Tuste.
Thank you. I just want to also follow up with Councillor Bound and his comment about not supporting all of that. I mean, I felt that was a long list of recommendations. Personally, I do have concerns about the huge increase in staffing. I do think that is of concern. I personally, in the same way that Sue has mentioned, talk about when you're looking further into the future, I have a certain level of faith that we will look towards getting that balance and making sure that's done correctly as we go forward. The next 2 years it has got it balanced. So that's one thing, but as a long list of saying this, this and this, I don't believe that is necessarily, if people wanted to do them one at a time, that could be another way, wouldn't it, to say which ones we wanted to support. But you know, I think there has, as it's already been said, there's been a lot of comments made. I think I've said it. I'm looking and hoping that because of this scrutiny committee, that the portfolio holder's been making a lot of notes. He's going to go away. It's going to be taken into consideration what we've said, and then start to look at making sure that we end up with tweaking these. And obviously we can put forward amendments to the budget, as can all groups, to make sure that we try and get something that makes sense. Thank you.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you. I think this has been a really useful conversation to understand, I think, where the committee lies. I think perhaps the recommendation that we can agree on together relates to the staffing question. So perhaps the recommendation that says this scrutiny committee recommends that the administration revisit the proposals for a significant increase in staffing and the potential long-term financial impacts this could have, and have that as a discrete motion or discrete recommendation rather for the present.
That sounds positive enough. You going to second that, Councillor McIntyre?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Okay, you've heard that proposal for a recommendation to go up for the Cabinet to revisit the staffing issues. Can we have all those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Anybody else for a recommendation? I think that's enough for this evening. Councillor Basham?
In the interest of balance, I just wanted to say that on the positive feedback side, I would like to make a personal recommendation, if others choose to support it, so be it, to applaud Cabinet on various items in the budget upon which they're spending and allocating residents' funds. Solar PV project enhancements of play programme areas, additional play area officer, developing a new health hub in the top of the town, extra tree maintenance, freezing bulky waste. I could go on. I won't, because this paper is full of excellent investments in this borough and our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Basham. Is there any more discussion on the proposed MTFS? Councillor Basham.
Just for Joe, I would like that minuted, please, and attributed to me.
You made that clear, yes. Yeah. Then I'm going to draw that discussion to a close and move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is the review of the work programme. So we're getting away from budgets. Thank you very much, Councillor James, and enjoy the rest of your holiday. Right, now we've covered the draft budget proposals this evening for the 21st of November, 23rd of January. We've got performance indicators, and that will be coming from the leader, Cabinet Portfolio. Yes, Councillor Basham.
I believe, thank you, Chair, I believe that we were supposed to have a working group meeting on that, and I believe it's been cancelled. So I just wanted to question whether that's still going to come forward in January.
Officers, yeah, Sue, please.
Apologies, my understanding is that it had gone back in again, but I will double check that. But no, there's absolutely intention to have the performance panel prior to that committee discussion.
Yes, and I remember that one coming through as a cancellation. 19th of March, and we've got the review and discussion with housing associations. They'll be attending the Scrutiny Committee. It's subject to a receipt of a topic suggestion form. The actual detail of what's going to be enclosed in that meeting we're not aware of yet. Democratic Services have yet to get it. The thing is, that's a placeholder more than anything else. That's what the main discussion is going to be on that particular scrutiny meeting. And then we also have a review of waste, the waste service provision, and we're going to have to wait for papers to come in on that to see what we can chew on. And then we're back to the Q3 key performance indicators. So,
sorry, if I may, so our performance panel is scheduled for the 12th of December, and I've just checked you are all on the invite.
thank you for that.
It's 6 o'clock in the evening to 7:30.
Councillor Basham.
With regards to the work programme, Chair, we had, I think you were there actually, we did some scrutiny training recently, and one of the things that sat in my mind after that was that we were, as a committee, we were able to, I guess, call in anyone who has an impact on services for local residents in principle. That one of the matters that's ongoing in the borough, and I think is getting, in certainly the town, and is getting worse. And I know that council tried to do something about it and has been rebuffed by central government, which was funding for noise cameras. The road noise, which in my ward is, I've been told, is youths on motorbikes without helmets. I've seen them without number plates, going around dealing drugs. And we've also got the problem of car meets elsewhere in other wards and just general sort of car racing noise. Does this committee have any power to talk to the police about it? Can we get them to come here and explain to us what they're doing about it and what they can do about it, or where their hands may be tied? Thank you.
The simple answer to that is yes. We have the power. Anybody that has or anything that has an impact on our residents, and it's brought to the attention of this committee, because if you're looking at page 92, we're going to be calling in, or the intention is calling the festival place managers. We can reach out to anybody and make the invitation if we need to examine a certain subject within this committee. Yes, sir.
I think you've just used the right wording there. We can invite them to come in and talk to us, but we can't enforce them to come in and talk to us. And obviously, from a scrutiny point of view, in terms of there isn't a service within the council that you can kind of seek for them to come in and talk to you about it as such. It would be things that are powered. So yes, any partner could be asked to come and join us to talk to us about any key concerns in terms of the overall impact on residents, but say it's purely optional.
Councillor McIntyre.
Yeah, it was just to add to Councillor Basham's point there. I've been speaking to the Police and Crime Commissioner, Donna Jones, on this subject. We weren't rebuffed. What happened was the Department of Transport had already invited the councils and apparently found that the cameras that they were using weren't that viable. So they are looking at other cameras to potentially use, and we've the Police and Crime Commissioner knows that our council is quite keen to trial them out when they come forward, because we have the same issue in Sherburn, St John and Rookstown with the meets that we had coming up there as well. So it's something we're absolutely keen on supporting.
Thank you, Councillor McIntyre. I mean, I have to say, I've lived here 16 years now, and just the last 12 months or so, it has completely changed the complexion of living in the town centre. It's a scourge, it really is. I'd be interested if the committee would be interested in inviting the police, whether they want to come or not.
I've got no hesitation to accept that. We do have a form, a mechanism, whereby get something onto the work programme. If you could do that through it should be on the members hub, and Julia will make sure that everybody gets that. Councillor Carr, you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was to suggest an item for the work programme. The leader of the Conservative group will fill out the form for democratic services, but just to raise here, I think there would be merit in having a conversation, an opportunity to scrutinise the operation of our communications protocol and how that's being delivered by officers, whether the line between party political announcements by the administration and council announcements by the administration is being properly followed, and connected to that, whether officers are comfortable and aware of the correct protocol when it comes to a liaison with community groups where there is a party political connection. I think there's an opportunity for Scrutiny Committee to ensure that those protocols are operating as they should.
Yes, sir.
Happy to feed that back in terms of the request around that discussion and how those protocols work. We have to be very careful that we are not discussing it in committee in a public position any specific examples of where those protocols may have been breached. So we just need to be very careful that it will be a general conversation around those activities.
That's almost what I was going to add. I think it's going to be more and make sure that everybody understands what the protocols are, because I think there's probably some misunderstanding around the whole business of how you liaise with the communications team. I learnt an awful lot last year because I was talking to the communications team every day, and I learnt an awful lot, but a lot of people don't have that kind of connection, and I think it's a very understandable concern that all members should have a crystal clear idea of what the protocols are with the officers. Yeah, and again, submit the form. That's what it's all about. So that road noise, comms protocol. And I would ask Julia to be confirmed. If you could drop those into the be confirmed at the bottom of this. Now, the other two things I wanted to bring up. Oh, just on one of those. Go on.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say, could we possibly call in the community safety team along with the police at the same time? Because I think that would probably be a good joined up.
This is exactly what we do when we pick a topic, and then we look at who's providing the various services. From, in this case, policing service, and yes, You know, we could have 3 or 4 representatives there to bring them in. It makes for a worthwhile discussion as well, because then you're looking at a complete picture as much as we can, because you've got the representatives of wards here and of residents. That's why we have a committee of members. So yeah, good suggestions. I'm going to move on. There are 2, sorry, on the last page here was the one for the housing register. There's a review, called a review group. I'm not quite, well, we established the Task and Finish group in January 23 on housing, and Councillor Tustain here is leading that group. In fact, she's leading 2 groups. And this gives you an idea of what the content is being undertaken by that group. Now, the fact that it was identified in January 23 is before the elections. We have the other group is one for transport, which is, again, Councillor Tustain is heading up. Now, the big problem with both of these Task and Finish groups is establishing membership. Membership comes from members. It doesn't necessarily have to be members from this committee. It can be members from across the council. So I'm mentioning it now. If there's any members of the committee present or is aware of anybody who would like to join either of those Task and Finish groups, could they advise Councillor Tustain and Julia? I'm going to be drafting a note for release, which I'll pass through Councillor Tustain to all council members, because we want to get the message out there to ask for membership, and we'll try and give a date of starting. The transport Task and Finish group will not start until probably February. Would that be the best estimate? Yeah, we're waiting on a Hampshire for that, because we have to make a connection in Hampshire, because the Task and Finish groups are a bit like calling in the external agencies into anything we want to examine here, and they become participants in the Task and Finish group. Housing, of course, our housing officers and the housing providers are ones that get dragged into it. So it's they're both extremely necessary things to examine. Housing is one of our biggest interests in housing provision within the borough, and transport's another one. So they're both hot topics, and anybody that wants to cut their teeth on the Task and Finish groups to be very, very welcome. So I don't know if anybody's got a comment now, but I'll leave you to contact Councillor Tustain and Julia if you so wish to join them, and I'll be pushing that invitation out in the very near future to all council members. I have nothing else. I will probably break a little bit of protocol. I'll go around, just glance around the table if anybody's got anything else they want to bring up. If not, officers, nope. I will draw this scrutiny meeting to a close. Thank you very much for coming in.